City that has survived for centuries, lying behind majestic walls, the place where great empires, intrigues, and desperate heroes breathed their last. Constantinople, this timeless ancient city, with its golden domes glowing at sunset, was not just a capital city. It was a legend, a dream, and sometimes a curse. The heart of the Byzantine Empire beats here, but this heart is tired. The weight of footsteps echoing around every corner whispers that an era is coming to an end. On the other hand, the Ottoman Empire, rising from the fertile soil of Anatolia, is advancing step by step, like a young and powerful giant. As the spirit of time prepares to write a new story, the last remnants of the old world desperately resist their fate. This epic clash between a crumbling empire and a nascent one is one of history's greatest farewells. This is a story of courage, hope, and an inevitable end. One city, two civilizations, and now the great struggle is about to begin, which is nearing its end. Friends, what I am about to tell you today will open one of the most painful pages of history. The long road along which ancient Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire, was slowly but inevitably led to its dissolution. And this road was paved with blood, destruction, and utter betrayal. Let us now turn the dusty pages of history and go back to the sad days of Constantinople, which was overshadowed by the Fifth Crusade. It was the late 12th century. The Byzantine Empire had survived for centuries. The gold-plated domes, the magnificent walls along the Golden Horn, the riches carried by merchants from all over the world. Ah yes, Constantinople was still the heart of the world. But this heart was now tired. Infighting, dynastic strife, intrigue, and an army that had lost its former strength had deeply wounded Byzantium. Wealth only covered a decaying splendor. And when the day came, this glorious city would meet a catastrophe of a different kind. The treasonous footsteps of Westerners who shared their faith began to echo in the Golden Horn. The beginning of the IBTH Crusade was actually a journey to the Holy Land. Pope Innocentius III had united the entire Christian world in Europe to recapture Jerusalem from the Muslims. But the fate of this expedition was doomed from the start. When the Crusaders could not find the money for the war, the powerful merchants of Venice stepped in. For their own interests, the Venetians would direct the soldiers participating in this expedition and chart a new course. Those holy ambitions were replaced by the ambition to dominate the trade routes and the pursuit of wealth. This ambition was the first step toward the disaster of Constantinople. In 1204, a huge Crusader army and Venetian ships arrived at the gates of Constantinople. Imagine, friends, the Crusaders looking at those enormous walls and saying that this city should be the jewel of the Western Christian world. But there was another fire burning inside them. Gold, silver, valuables. They were blinded by greed. Constantinople would be betrayed by its Western brothers. The walls were breached, that glorious city fell to some of the most brutal looting history has ever witnessed. In the churches, those holy places were seen not as places of worship, but as piles of gold and jewelry. Soldiers rode into Hagia Sophia on horseback, trampling on the sanctity of the sanctuary, while icons, relics, and precious artifacts were looted one by one. Some priests recited prayers, trembling with rage, while others could not look at what was happening and collapsed in the corners in tears. Houses were set on fire, women and children screamed helplessly in the streets, while Venetian merchants and Crusader soldiers shared the spoils. Constantinople was wounded, never to regain its former glory. And this destruction targeted not just the stones and treasures, but the very soul of Byzantium. The Latins put their puppet rulers on the imperial throne and tried to divide the Byzantine lands. The deep roots of Eastern Rome were shaken, and the empire lost its former strength. Indeed, the Byzantine people would remember this period as the Latin invasion, and this wound would not heal until the end of the empire. The weakened city was doomed to economic collapse, political turmoil, and a population living under constant threat. Only after this destruction did Byzantium try to regroup. In 1261, the Latin Empire would fall, and the Byzantine throne would be returned to the nobility of Eastern Rome. But this return was not a victory, only a struggle for survival. Constantinople was no longer the glorious city it once was. The walled neighborhoods were ruined buildings, empty squares and silent churches. Trade routes were gone, treasures had already been plundered, and so Byzantium, the great empire that had once risen as the eastern continuation of Rome, began to retreat into itself and fight for survival. But this time they were up against a completely different force, the Ottomans. And the Ottomans were marching towards the gates of Constantinople, growing bigger every year. What would this ancient city, which once succumbed to the ambition of the Crusaders, do against the might of the Ottomans? Would the city walls once again witness one of the greatest challenges in history? My friends, now I will take you to the birth of a rising principality, starting from the heart of Anatolia, and then to the steppes that extended westward, shaking even fortresses that were thought to be indestructible. The Ottoman Empire, yes, a power that was founded on that small piece of land, a power that nobody cared much about at the beginning, but that would soon bring the world to its knees. Let's process this epic story together. Let's witness the foundations of this empire being built, step by step, stone by stone. It all started in the late 13th century. Anatolia was in complete chaos at that time. Mongol invasions were raging from east to west, and the Seljuk Sultanate was weakened. Small principalities had been established all over Anatolia, each struggling to maintain its own existence. It was in this turmoil that the Ottomans were born, as a small end principality around Sugut and Dumanik. Osman Bey was a valiant leader who united the lands he had taken from his father, Ertugrul Gazi. But what distinguished the Ottomans from the other principalities was that they were not just after power, but for a cause. For them, Gaza, that is, raising the flag of the Islamic world high and bringing the enemy to its knees, came first. Osman Bey first turned to the weakened border fortresses of Byzantium. At the time, Byzantium was still recovering from the wounds inflicted by the Hiveth Crusade and struggling with internal rebellions and economic collapse. It was with the realization of this weakness that the Ottomans set their sights on the West. Imagine that the Ottomans were a handful of people, but the faith they carried in their souls turned them into an army. Osman Bey is famously quoted as saying, "Our cause is not the cause of a dry world, but illahi kelimatullah, that is, to glorify the name of Allah." This spirit carried them forward. As the Ottoman Empire began to expand, the throne passed to Orhan Gazi. When Orhan inherited his father's legacy, he was not only a bey, but also a leader looking for ways to become a state builder. Under Orhan Gazi, the Ottomans were already a recognized power in Anatolia. But more important was the serious implementation of plans for the West. In 1326, the conquest of Bursa, considered the first great victory of the Ottomans, took place. Bursa. The once Byzantine fortress had become the first capital of the Ottomans. With the capture of Bursa, the Ottoman Empire was growing not only on the battlefield, but also by establishing an urban culture and understanding of governance. After Bursa, it was the turn of the Byzantine fortresses on the Marmara coast. Important places like Iznik and Izmit fell to the Ottomans one by one. However, behind this expansion was not only the sword, but also intelligence. Orhan Gazi expanded his territory by taking advantage of Byzantino turmoil and conducted clever disputes between Byzantine tribes and several throne disputes. The Ottomans took advantage of this weakness and moved westward step by step. After Orhan Gazi, it was Murad I who took the stage. Murad Hudavendigar, the ruler whose name is legendary and whose courage and leadership took the Ottoman Empire far beyond a principality. During Murad I's reign, the Ottomans had already begun to set foot on Rumelia, that is, on European soil. During his reign, the Ottoman army was not just composed of fighting soldiers. It was a disciplined, trained, and targeted force. The conquest of Edirne in 1361 was one of the first major Ottoman victories in Europe. The capture of Edirne meant that Byzantium's western arm was completely cut off. The Byzantiums were shaken by this conquest, my friends, because now the Ottomans were a great power not only in Anatolia, but also in the heart of Europe. And these conquests did not only mean the fall of cities. The Ottomans' just rule, tolerance, and strategic intelligence were enough to win the hearts of the people in the conquered lands. Thus, as the Ottomans advanced, they left behind not enemies, but new loyalties. The bridges, castles, and foundation works established in Rumelia were a sign of the Ottoman Empire's permanence. But my friends, this rise of the Ottomans was a nightmare for Byzantium. This new power from the west was pushing the gates of the centuries-old empire one by one, encircling Constantinople. While struggling with its own internal problems, Byzantium was at a loss as to what to do in the face of the unstoppable Ottoman advance. But how long would the Ottoman rise last, and how long would Byzantine resistance hold out? I will tell you in the next chapter whether this new power, which stood on the walls of Constantinople, could bring the city down. The fate that awaited behind the walls held a secret that would change the course of history forever for both the Ottomans and Byzantium. My friends, history sometimes witnesses such moments, that empires reaching to the skies suddenly stagger and crash to the ground, their tremors turning into an echo that shakes the world. Such a turning point occurred in the fate of the Ottoman Empire, 1402. The Battle of Ankara, Timur's massive armies, and that fateful day that brought the Ottomans to their knees. A fateful moment that both inflicted deep wounds on the Ottoman Empire and gave Byzantium a respite, if only for a while. Now I will take you to that dusty steppe, to the center of the battlefield, a battle in which there were no cities, no walls, only people, dreams, and the lust for power. At that time, Yildirim Bayezid, the architect of great conquests, sat on the Ottoman throne. Bayezid was a brave, ambitious, and decisive sultan, who, living up to his nickname, moved like lightning and brought his enemies to their knees. He triumphed at Kosovo, raised the Ottoman flag in the Balkans, and put a tight cordon around the heart of Byzantium, unable to find a hole to breathe. However, the twist of fate sometimes strikes people from a direction they never expected. A storm came from far away, from the depths of Central Asia, Timur and his enormous army. March 6, 1951. Timur. He was a warrior and a ruler, whose name was remembered with trembling by everyone at that time. He united the steppes of the East with his iron fist, unleashed his armies across the world, and became an invincible power. In Timur's eyes, the Ottomans were like a new rising threat. It was impossible for two powerful leaders to coexist in the same geography. The inevitable rivalry between Bayezid and Timur would turn into a great showdown that would decide the fate of Anatolia. Eventually, the two armies came face to face on the Kubak Plain near Ankara. Oh, my friends, what a battle that field has seen. When Bayezid's army went into battle formation, both the soldiers from Anatolia and the troops gathered from Rumelia stood tall. But Timur's army, oh, that army, with its countless elephants, its soldiers waving like an ocean, it was like a black cloud that had erupted from the depths of the earth. That day, as brave and daring as Bayezid was, fate was as cruel. The Ottoman army fought against Timur, but there were betrayals and disillusions that changed the course of the war. Anatolian beys sided with Timur and left Bayezid alone. At that moment, the walls of the Ottoman army began to crumble one by one. Timur's army, armed with elephants, broke through the Ottoman ranks. The once invincible commander Yildirim Bayezid was captured in that battle. This defeat, my friends, was a great disaster for the Ottomans. Not just a battle, but the foundations of an empire were shaken. The Anatolian lands were shattered. Timur had once again freed the Ottoman beys and allowed the principalities to rule. The Ottoman Empire had suddenly shrunk. The lands gained through conquests were lost, and most importantly, it was left without a sultan. With Bayezid's captivity, a fight for the throne started between the sons. Historians describe this period as the Fetre period, a period of fetre, a period of stagnation. For 11 years, the Ottoman Empire dealt with this stormy period in which brothers and sisters were pitted against each other, and the state was on the brink of disintegration. Desperate men sought relief in one subversive thing, one of the people in the film, and it was during this period that Byzantium finally took the breath it had been waiting for. The Ottoman armies that had surrounded Constantinople had retreated and moved away from the city walls. The Byzantium emperor took advantage of this turmoil on the Ottoman throne to start making diplomatic moves again. For a while, they felt as if they were free of the huge imperial burden. Byzantium, which had been living under the shadow of the Ottomans for years, found the opportunity to recover to some extent, as if it had come to light. Of course, this respite was not enough for Byzantium to return to its former strength. But the brief respite bought them time. And what about the Ottoman Empire? Would the wounds inflicted by Timur and the struggles for the throne during the Age of Conquest spell the end of this young state? Or would it rise from its ashes and cast its shadow over Byzantium once again? We will look for the answer to this question in our next story. We will discover together what was the fate of the Ottoman Empire as it rose, fell apart, and tried to rise again. Ah, my friends, I will now take you back to those difficult years when the Ottoman Empire was reborn from the ashes. As the gloom of the Fatrat period hung over Anatolia like a dark cloud, a young ruler, Murad II, ascended to the throne, tore through the darkness, and brought the Ottoman Empire back to its feet. It was during this period that the Ottoman Empire not only regained its lands, but also regained its former might that had struck fear into the hearts of the world. But it was not easy. It was necessary to fight both the fractured principalities in Anatolia and the enemies in the Balkans. And of course, Byzantium. Ah, that Byzantium. That ancient empire that tried to breathe again every time the Ottomans were weak. This time, it was going to look for ways to survive by reaching out to the west. It all started with the end of the period of conquest that the Ottomans had fallen into. With Timur's retreat, the Anatolian lands had once again fallen into the hands of the old beys, and the unity of the Ottoman Empire had been shattered. The relentless sibling rivalry between the sons of Yildirim Bayezid drove the state to the brink of collapse. But in the end, at the end of this stormy period, one name shone: Celebi Mehmed, the ruler who took the first step to pull the Ottoman Empire out of this civil war. But it would be his son Murad II who would write the real epic. When Murad II ascended to the throne at a young age, he had a heavy burden on his shoulders. He was faced with the task of both maintaining internal order and restoring the Ottoman Empire to its former strength. First, he turned to Anatolia. Ah, my friends, the mountains and plains of Anatolia were at that time awash with unfinished conquests and the search for freedom. The old principalities freed by Timur had risen up again, challenging the authority of the Ottomans. Murad II, taking over his father's legacy, succeeded in bringing these principalities to their knees one by one. Aino Gulari, Menteso Gulari, Yaino Gulari. One by one, they all united under the Ottoman banners. When the flag of the Ottoman Empire was once again planted in the heart of Anatolia, Murad was no longer just a sultan, he was the architect of unity. Minga, a real epic, was written in the Balkans. The Ottoman presence in Rumelia had been shaken during the period of conquest. Serbs, Hungarians, and other Balkan kingdoms took advantage of the Ottoman weakness and started to organize attacks on Turkish lands. Murad II did not remain silent in the face of these attacks. He responded to the enemy in such a way that the hooves of the Ottoman horses, echoing in the cold waters of the Danube, struck fear deep into the Balkans. Battles such as Varna Plain and Islati Derbendi were victories that consolidated the Ottoman dominance in the Balkans. Murad II's armies crossed the mountains and forests of Rumelia and reclaimed former Ottoman lands one by one. While the Hungarian armies were routed, the Serbs were forced to submit to the Ottomans again. While these victories made the Ottomans a rising power once again, Byzantium was writhing in despair. Behind the high walls of Constantinople, the Byzantine emperors were growing more and more despondent with each news of victory, terrified to see the Ottomans regaining their former power. In the face of Murad II's victories, Byzantium decided to play its old games once again. They realized that they could no longer survive by fighting the Ottomans alone. So they turned their eyes westward. They began sending appeals for help to the Christian kingdoms of the West, to the papacy, and even to Venice. These diplomatic moves of Byzantium were trying to ignite the fuse of a new crusade. Papal efforts to unite the kings of Europe under the pretext of stopping the Turks gained momentum. But my friends, how strong could the united armies of the West be against the Ottomans? Could the genius of Murad II and the disciplined armies of the Ottomans be enough to foil all European plans? To find the answer to this question, in our next story, we will travel to the dusty fields of the Crusades. Let's see how the rising sun of the Ottoman Empire will disperse the dark clouds of the West. And now, my dear friends, we are going to witness the emergence of the young ruler who changed the fate of the Ottoman Empire and shook the course of the world from beginning to end. Mehmed II, this young sultan, who had etched his name in history as a child, but who still carried the real victory in his heart like an ember, was ascending the throne to realize a dream that would change the course of the Ottoman Empire and even the world. His eyes looked not only to the borders of a country but beyond the ages. When his father Murad II abdicated the throne, Mehmed, only 19 years old, became the ruler with the responsibility of an entire empire on his shoulders. But he was not a child. He was a conqueror who would shape the future. From a very young age, Mehmed II had received an education steeped in science and art. The most important scholars of his time nourished both his mind and soul. While learning state administration with the lessons he took from Hola Guarani, he equipped himself in every field from mathematics to astronomy to conquer Constantinople. To conquer Constantinople, the ancient capital of Byzantium, he returned to studies at the French Department of Mathematics and began constructing a billet. This city had haunted the dreams of Muslims for centuries. Many a ruler, many an army had been stopped before its walls. But Mehmed believed that this ancient legend would come to an end, and those gates would open to his armies. The fire that burned in his heart gave strength and courage to everyone around him. Samuakan Bukfils startit medab. Of course, my dear friends, Byzantium was not unaware of the dreams of this young sultan. When Constantine, the last emperor of Byzantium, heard that the Ottomans had a young and ambitious sultan at their helm, he was deeply concerned. Constantinople had long been a shadow empire. Once the heart of Rome, the city was now squeezed into a tiny space, surrounded by Ottoman territory. Constantine XI's throne was wobbling, but he still held out hope. The city's high walls and the protective waters of the Golden Horn kept the last Byzantine stronghold standing. Constantine XI was aware of the rising threat posed by Mehmed and sought ways to frustrate the young sultan's move at all costs. He sent ambassadors to the west, asking for help and trying to convince the kings of Europe that the fall of Byzantium would be the end of them. The papacy felt it was its duty to prevent the fall of Constantinople in order to awaken a crusading spirit, but the kings of Europe were preoccupied with their own internal strife. Constantine XI's hopes were fading, but behind the walls, preparations for the siege were in full swing. Great blacksmiths were forging giant cannons, chains were being prepared to protect the Golden Horn, and soldiers were arming themselves to defend the city. But no matter how many preparations were made, the same question was always echoing in the back of Constantine XI's mind. Could this young Ottoman Sultan accomplish what no one had ever done before? Ah, my friends, when Mehmed II sat on the Ottoman throne with the desire for conquest in his heart, the fate of Byzantium was already sealed. Sultan Mehmed II, with his brilliant mind and unshakable will, not only dreamed but also had the power to realize his dreams. He had already started to formulate his plans, gathered his troops, and was preparing to stand against the Byzantine walls that were supposed to be impenetrable. But what were Mehmed's plans? What set him apart from other rulers so that at such a young age he was preparing for a conquest that seemed impossible? and what was the great decision made by Constantine V as he awaited his fate behind those thick walls. Here, my dear friends, in our next story, we will take a look behind the scenes of this great siege. My dear friends, the time was drawing near. For one of the greatest sieges of the ages, both the Ottomans and Byzantium were holding their breath, trying to hold the thin thread of destiny in their hands. Rarely on earth has there been a confrontation of such magnitude. One side was preparing for conquest under the banner of a rising power, while the other was fighting the last battle of a city struggling to survive centuries of glory. But this was not just a battle between an army and a castle. It was one of the turning points on the stage of history, on the way to the closing of one era and the beginning of another. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II had not yet received the title of conqueror, but it was as if he had been preparing for this moment for centuries. Every detail, every plan was coming together in his mind. The Ottoman Empire had already overcome the conquest period and had taken control of most of Anatolia. With a strong presence established in the Balkans, Byzantium was already encircled like an island, with nowhere to breathe. But Mehmed knew that this was not enough. Constantinople was famous for its walls, my friends. Such walls that for centuries, countless armies had been helpless in front of these gigantic stone walls and had buried their dreams there and then. This is why Sultan Mehmed was preparing for the siege not only with military might, but also with intelligence and revolutionary technology. This revolutionary weapon would become one of the largest cannons in history, Shahi cannons. These cannons were cast by the Hungarian master Urban. Urban accepted Mehmed's generous offer and was brought to the Ottoman palace, where he set about casting a giant cannon. According to rumors, these cannons were so big that they required dozens of oxen and hundreds of soldiers to transport them after the casting was completed. Mehmed strongly believed that these giant cannons would destroy the Byzantine walls. Moreover, the siege was not just about attacking the walls. The Sultan had drawn up a detailed plan to breach the Golden Horn and the land walls. The Ottoman navy would show its might in the Marmara Sea, while on land, huge cannons would rain death on the walls. But Mehmed did not stop there. Perhaps in an unprecedented move, he would march the fleet by land to the Golden Horn and capture even this chained waterway, the last hope of Byzantium. Meanwhile, my friends, Byzantium, desperate but stubborn, continued its preparations. Constantine XI hoped that the walls would protect him, but their fate seemed to have been sealed in the ground. Nevertheless, they tried to survive with what they had. Blacksmiths in the city worked day and night, forging weapons, repairing tired fortifications, reinforcing every stone and wall. Byzantium not only fortified the city's defenses, but sent envoys to the great maritime cities of Venice and Genoa to ask for help from the West. Constantine asked these two powerful republics for soldiers, money, and ships. After all, the West had always been concerned about the Ottoman expansion. But this time the West was preoccupied with its own internal affairs. Although a few Venetian and Genoese ships came to Byzantium's huge army, still, Constantine II did not give up hope. According to him, this city was under God's protection. The people of the city prayed every night in Hagia Sophia, believing that divine intervention would save them. But these prayers were about to be drowned out by the roar of the Ottoman cannons rising outside the walls and the echoing marches of the Mekhatib. Thus, my dear friends, on the one hand, a young and ambitious sultan was preparing for a great conquest with his huge army. On the other hand, An empire on the verge of collapse was trying to make its last stand against history. Time was running out. When the Ottoman armies were at the foot of the walls, cannons resembling thunder would be fired, and the fate of Constantinople, which had been considered impenetrable for centuries, would finally be written. So, my friends, how will Sultan Mehmed's grand plan work? Will Byzantium achieve a miracle in its desperate resistance? Or will the ancient city hiding behind the walls rise under the Ottoman banner? We will find the answer to this question in the great storm that will break under the walls. And finally, my friends, as the first winds of spring stirred the waters of the Bosphorus, the curtains of history were once again being drawn back. On the orders of Sultan Mehmed II, the Ottoman army moved to surround Constantinople in March 1453. Every step, the setting up of every tent, were the footsteps of a great showdown that would change the course of history. This siege was no ordinary battle. The Ottoman army was so large that, according to rumors, the end of the camps could not be seen by the eye. As this enormous force, composed of Anatolian and Rumelian soldiers, marched forward with discipline, it was said that every single soldier carried the belief of victory in his heart. The Metter team gave spirit to this huge standing army. Drums, zurnas, and nakarets echoed in the air, striking fear into the hearts of the Byzantines behind the walls. Mehmed's army represented the power of a civilization in its own right. Thousands of sipahi, raiders, archers, janissaries, and behind them all, the majestic engineering tools of giant cannons. The cannons had been cast by the hands of Urban's craftsmen and were finally preparing to meet the supposedly indestructible walls. Mehmed's army represented the power of a civilization in its own right. In mid-March, Ottoman troops laid siege to the city from three sides. In front of the land walls, in the shadow of the ramparts, Ottoman soldiers began to set up their first positions. Sultan Mehmed's tent was the heart of the army. Green banners fluttered in the wind, and the young ruler's eyes were fixed resolutely on the walls. But my friends, this siege would not be conducted by land alone. The Ottoman navy had also appeared in the waters of Marmara. The city was besieged from land and blockaded from the sea. But Byzantium had not yet lost all its power. Constantine XI and his men had once again deployed the famous chain that had been used for centuries to prevent the Ottoman fleet from reaching the Golden Horn. This gigantic chain stretched between the two sides of the Golden Horn was so strong and effective that it would not allow any ship to enter. This chain was so big that even its thickness could shatter small boats to pieces. With the help of Venetian and Genoese engineers, Byzantium reused this defensive device to lock the Golden Horn. The giant ships of the Ottomans could not penetrate this chain. Therefore, the Golden Horn remained in Byzantine hands for the time being. Sultan Mehmed, however, was waiting for this situation. While focusing on the city walls, the young Sultan was also making clever plans to unlock the Golden Horn. He was aware that this siege would not be won by brute force alone, but by reason and strategy. But on those days, despite the disappointment of not being able to reach the Golden Horn, the Ottoman soldiers continued to take up positions in front of the walls. At night, the echoing melodies of the Meta reached the narrow streets of Byzantium, and fear and despair mingled with the prayers of the people. The Byzantine front was more tense than ever in those days. Constantine XI and his commanders were on top of the city walls, carefully watching every move of the Ottoman army. Every man, woman, and child in the city was trying to support the defense in any way they could. The walls were being repaired, catapults were being prepared, and archers were taking their places. For the Byzantines, this was not just the defense of a city. It was the last hope of salvation. Behind the walls, under the dark domes of Hagia Sophia, the people gathered, waiting for miraculous help. They wanted to believe that one day, suddenly, a huge fleet would come from the west and destroy the Ottoman fleet, that the giant cannons in front of the walls would crumble and Mehmed's army would retreat. But Sultan Mehmed's army moved forward patiently, like a river patiently eroding stone into earth, to melt Byzantium's resistance. Towards the end of March, the Ottoman cannons were pointed at the walls for the first time and fired with a terrible roar. The stones cracked and crumbled, and anxiety began to show in the faces of the Byzantine soldiers. Now, my friends, the first step of the siege had been taken, but this was only the beginning. How far would the Ottomans' giant cannons push the walls? How long will Byzantium be able to defend the Golden Horn, protected by chains? And will the crazy plans Sultan Mehmed had in mind really be enough to open this lock? And that, my friends, while I was searching for the answers to these questions, the flames of the most glorious siege in history would rise, a little more and more each day. Ah, my friends, what I am about to tell is the story of steel and gunpowder that ended not only a war, but an era. Such a power that overthrew the centuries-old dominance of stone walls, castles, and fortifications. Such an innovation that made the ancient art of defense obsolete in an instant. This was the brightest star of Sultan Mehmed's grand plans, the gigantic cannons and war machines. The walls surrounding Constantinople were known as the strongest and most magnificent defensive structures in the world. As the saying goes, only God can destroy these walls. Such strong, thick, and layered walls had not yielded to attackers for centuries. But Sultan Mehmed, despite his young age, was a wise ruler. He knew that those walls could be broken down not only by courage, but also by wisdom and innovation. That is why from the very beginning, what he relied on were cannons the likes of which history had never seen. Ah, those giant cannons, so majestic as if they were cast by the hands of giants, so powerful that when they were fired the earth would shake. Now close your eyes and imagine. In the camp of the Ottoman army, right in the center stands a giant bronze cannon. We'll be in hell to the master Hungarian engineer named Urban stood before Sultan Mehmed and told him he could build these deadly machines. A light shone in the Sultan's eyes, and so Ottoman engineering combined with Urban's ingenuity, and the result was the greatest weapon of war of the time, the Shahi cannons. Some of these giant cannons were 8 meters long, 8 meters! Each one fired huge stone cannonballs weighing several tons. Just to see these cannons being moved was a miracle in itself. Hundreds of soldiers were moving these cannons inch by inch, dragging them on giant wheels. Trees were felled to clear the roads, and the earth was leveled. At every step, the echoing melodies of the Mehderan team made the soldiers forget their fatigue and breathed a spirit into these great machines. And finally, imagine the fear on the faces of the Byzantine soldiers standing guard on the walls when those cannons were placed in their positions at the beginning of the siege. They had never seen or heard anything like it. The first shot, my friends, the first shot. There was such a rumble that it was as if the sky had split open and a terrible dragon had awakened from the ground. The sound of the falcon cannons firing made even the dust cloud in the core of the shaft tremble. And then, When the huge cannonball flew with great fury and hit the walls, stones scattered like grains of sand. Byzantine walls were indestructible, they said, but Ottoman cannons began to shatter this myth. The Ottoman army besieging the city would fall silent for a moment every time the cannons fired, watching with bated breath as the huge stone cannonballs met the walls. At the first shots, the Byzantines tried to quickly close the holes and repair the walls. At night, behind the walls, thousands of workers fought with stones and mortar in their hands. But the impact of these Ottoman engineering marvels was so great that the walls began to crumble a little more every day. Each cannonball widened the cracks in those walls. Each blow shook the hope in the heart of Byzantium a little more, and innovations in warfare techniques. Ah, my friends, herein lay the difference of Sultan Mehmed. While the Ottoman army was pounding the walls with its cannons, it was also exhausting the enemy and weakening its defenses with new warfare techniques. Every night, Ottoman soldiers dug deep trenches in front of the walls, built wooden platforms, and rained stones and fire from catapults. These attacks continued day and night. The Byzantine soldiers could not sleep a wink of sleep on their eyelids. The discipline of the Ottoman army is another story. Sipahis, raiders, janissaries. Each of them carried out their orders perfectly, patiently waiting for the moment of victory, and those astonishing strategies. Sultan Mehmed did not only rely on cannons. From time to time he had tunnels dug underground, undermining the walls and distracting the Byzantines. Everything was part of a perfect plan. As the walls of Constantinople trembled a little more with each thundering cannon, the determination of the Ottoman army grew. Sultan Mehmed would walk among his soldiers, giving them courage and morale. It was impossible not to see the gleam of victory in the eyes of this young ruler. But Byzantium was still resisting. Even amidst all the noise, even amidst all the destruction, Byzantine soldiers were trying to make the best of the defense. Constantine IV and his men were praying to keep the people on their feet, shouting, "This city will not fall," as the people gathered under the domes of Hagia Sophia, waiting for a miraculous deliverance. The Ottoman cannons continued to shake the city one by one. And finally, my friends, when the first breaches began to open in those great walls, everyone knew the point of no return had been reached. But this was only the beginning. Would Sultan Mehmed's plans end here? Were those giant cannons going to bring down the walls completely? Or would the people of Byzantium, who had been waiting for a miracle, once again encounter a surprise that would change the course of history? And it was with these questions, my friends, that the fate of that great siege, buried in the dusty pages of history, would continue to be shaped. Ooh, dear listener, imagine a city so desperate that it has to fight its own heart. As Constantinople faced an ever-tightening circle around it, the weaknesses of its defenses and a sense of helplessness hung over the city like a heavy fog. But in such difficult times, there was a weapon that had been forged in the strong hands of Byzantium throughout history: Greek fire. This deadly invention steeped in legend, but also a spark of hope. And now the fate of the city was left to the power of these eerie flames. It is said that as Constantine XI looked out from the walls of his city, to which he was mortally attached, he was crushed by decisions that would go down in the history books. Everything rested on his shoulders, keeping the faith of his people alive, keeping his soldiers determined, and creating a last chance against the siege. This is where the Greek fire came into play. Byzantium was familiar with these flames from its past wars. This fire, which could burn even on water, was a symbol of terror. It was time to use this ancient secret once again against the Ottoman navy. Suddenly one night, as the Ottoman fleet waited, positioned on the waves of the Golden Horn, the artillerymen on the Byzantine walls readied their fireballs and catapults carrying Greek fire. This infernal creation, resembling a dance of flames, split the air and was sent toward the Ottoman wooden ships. It is said that the sky turned red with flame and the silence of the night echoed with the cries of exploding ships and panicked Ottoman soldiers. Oh, my dear friend, it makes your heart flutter just to imagine it, doesn't it? But this was not just the use of a weapon, it was also a battle for psychological superiority. Immediately after this event, Constantine XI redoubled his efforts to boost morale in the city. He gathered people to the stone walls of Hagia Sophia, where he shared his battle plans and tried to keep hope high. Clergymen went among the people, calling them to pray for victories. "Remember," Constantine said, his voice echoing loud enough to reach beyond the walls, "we are not just fighting for a city, we are fighting for the honor of our ancestors and the future of our children." These words brought new courage among the people, and those who had heard the Ottomans panicking in the face of the flames believed in their own strength again. Whether this momentary victory brought about by the Greek fire would be a lasting solution was completely unknown in the uncertainty of the siege. However, when the flames were unleashed on the Ottoman fleet and the night was illuminated, it was both a challenge to the Ottomans and a fuel for the fire of courage that was kept alive in the people. But after that night, the question remained, how much could this fire change the course of history? Was the power of the flame strong enough to prevent the destruction of an entire empire? And did Fatih's foresight conceal a genius that could overcome this challenge? My dear listener, we will find the answer to this in the future, but first we will see together other dramas rising over these ancient walls. Ah, my friends, I have before me an event that has been engraved in the pages of history in golden letters that I would like to share with you. It is such an example of genius that even the thought of it leaves one in awe. We remember the name of Mehmed the Conqueror, not only for the battles he won, but also for his clever strategies. This story I am about to tell proves once again what a great leader and a unique master of tactics he was. The landing of the Ottoman fleet in the Golden Horn. No, dear listeners, I don't mean simply from the sea. These ships were marched by land and landed in the Golden Horn. To the horror of all Byzantium, for days the Ottoman army had been besieging Constantinople from outside the walls. As the great cannons spewed death on the mighty Byzantine walls day and night, the tension inside the city grew by the hour. However, the chains on the Golden Horn and the Byzantine navy had created a powerful barrier that could block the Ottoman advance. That's when Fatih came up with an ingenious solution. This mission, which could not be accomplished by conventional means, had to be accomplished by an extraordinary effort. Starting from Alebekoi, Ottoman ships would be landed over the hills and lowered into the Golden Horn. Imagine, wooden galleys, ships of the great seas, would be carried on land as if they were wearing wings. It is hard to believe, but for the disciplined soldiers of the Ottoman Empire, it was just a new mission. Preparations began. A road hundreds of meters long was lined with sleds made of tree stumps and animal fat. After the logs were oiled, each ship was carefully pulled ashore. The power of animals, human labor, and more than that, faith. All of these combined for this endeavor. Under Fatih's command, this great plan was proceeding in perfect order. Every step was deliberate, every move was calculated to serve the purpose. Ottoman soldiers worked non-stop. Engineers checked the slipperiness of the logs and ensured the safe progress of the giant galleys. It was a superhuman effort. Historians say that this work took exactly 2 days. For 2 days, Fatih's army worked non-stop, landing more than 70 ships in the waters protected by those ancient chains. Ah, that moment, when the Byzantine soldiers looked down from the walls overlooking the Golden Horn in the morning mist, they were stunned by the sight. The safe waters of the Golden Horn were now teeming with the Ottoman fleet. The Byzantines could find no answer to this move, nor could they suppress their fear. This unprecedented or unprecedented move had a profound effect on their morale. Even their powerful weapons, such as the Greek fire, proved helpless against the Ottomans' boundless determination. Rumors spread among the people. Is this city really doomed to fall? The sense that the enemy outside the city walls was now inside had struck a sharp fear into the hearts of the Byzantine people. There was a determined light in Fatih's eyes. For him, this was only the beginning. He was thinking of many more strategies to hit Byzantium from inside the walls. However, with these ships, he not only captured the Golden Horn, but also shook the enemy's spirit of resistance. So, dear listener, how do you think the echoes of the victory that landed in the Golden Horn on these ships will prepare the end of Constantinople? We will now return to the shadows of the city walls and explore another story together. Conditions in Constantinople grew nobler than ever as the soldiers and spies of German prisoners became expert in war. Ah, listen, my friends. This date marks the end of one era and the beginning of another. On the morning of May 29th, the Ottoman army descended on Constantinople like a dark cloud, preparing for the final assault on the orders of Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror. Beyond the walls, the hopes of Byzantium had been crushed, but their spirits had not yet surrendered. While the people inside the city wavered between fear and faith, the Ottoman army's determination and desire for victory grew stronger by the minute. The war cries rising to the sky in front of the city walls heralded one of the greatest battles in history as the morning light dawned. Fatih had planned every detail of this attack and set up a perfect organization for his army to attack from 3 different fronts. The Ottoman army, which surrounded the city from the east, west, and sea, was organized with years of experience. Having observed the weaknesses in the city's defenses from the beginning of the siege, Fatih, in preparation for the final assault, directed all his great cannons against the city walls and pounded the castles of Constantinople like a lightning storm during the night. The noise was so loud that people in the city began to wonder whether it would be worse to die at the hands of the enemy or to be buried under the crumbling stones. With the roar of the cannons, the walls were unraveling more and more by the hour, and the Byzantines were exhausted trying to stop this catastrophe. One scene in the documentary: in the early hours of the morning, the order to attack finally came. The Ottoman army attacked in 3 waves. First, relatively weak and lightly armed troops began to pour into the open points of the walls. The aim of this first wave was to exhaust the Byzantines and wear down the defenses. As the Ottomans approached the walls step by step, the Byzantine soldiers on top of the castle began to rain arrows. Oh, imagine. As fireballs and rocks fell rapidly over the castle, the Ottoman soldiers rushed forward, each fearlessly taking one step closer to victory. But this was only the beginning. The first wave was followed by more disciplined and experienced soldiers, charging through the breaches in the walls with shields and axes. The Byzantine defenses were becoming increasingly strained, but Constantine XI and his brave men still held out. And then, the final blow. The Ottoman elite troops, the Janissaries, began to storm the walls in the latest wave of attacks. Stabbing the enemy line like a steel knife, these elite troops pierced through the defenses with swords and spears. On one side, the Ottoman soldiers attacking to the death. On the other, the Byzantines resisting like the last battle, my friends. And Constantine XI never thought of retreating. He put aside his imperial title and fought like a soldier among his people. Rumor has it that the words he uttered that morning, as he put on his armor, are etched in everyone's memory. "If I live, I will die as your emperor. But if I die, I will die as a common soldier." This noble stand filled the last moments of Byzantium with honor and courage. But the Ottoman determination and superiority was irresistible. As the defenses inside the city began to collapse, it was clear that victory was on the Ottoman side. As the walls were breached and the Byzantine soldiers gave up one by one, it is not even known for certain how Constantine XI died. Some say that he was put to the sword while fighting against an Ottoman soldier. Others say that he took off his armor and fought like an ordinary soldier, and that his body was not even recognized. And voila, Constantinople had fallen. The Ottoman flag was planted in the heart of the city. Not just a city, but an era had ended and a new era had begun. As the Byzantine Empire was fading into history, the glory of the Ottoman Empire was rising towards the sky. But, my friends, is victory always sweet? What do you think happened in the city immediately after the fall of Constantinople? What tragedies lurked in the shadow of this victory? Let's explore this together in the next episode. To remember that day, the greatest of all moments that changed the course of history, a new era that came to life behind the walls of Istanbul. When the Ottoman banners were planted on the highest points of the city on the morning of May 29, 1453, the footsteps of victory were undeniable. Hagia Sophia was not only the heart of the Byzantine Empire, but also the symbol of this victory for Mehmed the Conqueror. That morning, amidst the breaths of the Ottoman army, and Fatih's breaths mingling with the euphoria of victory, the banners of the Ottoman Empire were waving over this sacred structure like a badge of pride. When Mehmed the Conqueror entered a conquered city, he moved with quiet but dignified steps, not like a ruler, but like a monk who had taken possession of a talisman. There was still a deep silence behind the city walls. The city dwellers, stunned by the horror, had retreated to their homes, and the streets were filled with petrified faces. It was in such an atmosphere that Fatih and his high-ranking commanders entered the city with heavy steps on their horses. Sultan Mehmed's eyes seemed to be searching for traces of history that had been waiting for centuries for this moment, in the stone, dust, and fluttering banners in the sky. Looking out over the silent city, Mehmed knew what a great victory this moment was, but he also felt the responsibility of this victory on his shoulders. Mehmed the Conqueror headed straight for Hagia Sophia as soon as he entered the city. This unique structure, which had been the religious and cultural center of Byzantium for centuries, would now become a symbol of Ottoman power and faith with the conquest. Remember that moment. Sultan Mehmed entered the building, tired but majestic. Inside he saw hundreds of people gathered in silence, with broken hearts for what they saw. When these eyes filled with fear, despair, and helplessness looked at the Sultan, Mehmed said, "Do not be afraid," in a voice determined not to offend them. These words were more a consolation than an order, an assurance from a ruler to his people. It was there, under the vast dome of Hagia Sophia, that Mehmed declared that this city had begun a new era. From now on, this building is the house of God. It is a mosque. It is the symbol of conquest, he said, turning Hagia Sophia into a mosque. At that moment, the silence echoing inside the building was replaced by a new spirit, like a harbinger of the call to prayer that would rise from the minarets. With this decision, Mehmed did not just transform a building. He announced the end of an era and the beginning of the rise of the Ottoman Empire. On that day, the first Ottoman prayer was offered in the heart of Hagia Sophia, and the sounds echoing in its 1,000-year-old walls would come to life in the harmony of another faith. But the posture of the conqueror as he entered the city was not one of triumphal intoxication, my friends. On that day there was a humility in Fatih's demeanor that acknowledged his victory. Sources say that when Mehmed looked up at the magnificent dome of Hagia Sophia, he bent down, picked up a handful of earth and sprinkled it on his head. This gesture is reminiscent of the humility that breaks a ruler's pride and the transience of sovereignty. Knowing that no power in this world is eternal, the young sultan carried the responsibility of fulfilling his duty rather than the glory of conquest. On that day, this young sultan, walking the streets of Istanbul, honored not only the Ottoman Empire, but the entire Islamic world. Maybe the stones of Hagia Sophia would have wanted to say that day, "What will change in this city? Which epics will be written behind the walls? Which people will shoulder the burden of this new era?" But this story does not end here, my friends. How would Fatih rebuild the city after this great victory and turn it into the shining star of his empire? Let's look for answers to these questions in the next chapter. My friends, that May morning destroyed not only the walls, but an entire age. The millennia-old throne of Eastern Rome was now in ruins. Constantinople was no longer in Byzantine hands, but in Ottoman hands. It was the end of an era, but also the dawn of a new and completely different one. That morning, the Eastern Roman Empire had disappeared from the stage of history after centuries of domination. The name Byzantium would remain an echo in the depths of history, but the spirit that reigned within its walls would come to life in another form with the rise of the Ottoman Empire. With the conquest, Mehmed the Conqueror had not only captured a city, he had also declared to the world that the Ottoman Empire was a true empire. This victory transformed the Ottoman Empire from a regional power into a global monarchy. The Ottoman sultans were no longer seen as mere monarchs, but as heirs to Eastern Rome. Fatih had rekindled the torch of Rome with the Ottoman banners. This is why it is no coincidence that he received the title Kaiser of Rome. The historical heritage of Rome was being combined with the spirit of the Islamic world. The repercussions of the conquest were like a storm on the European continent. The fall of Constantinople sent a wave of terror through the kingdoms of Europe. The papacy in particular was convinced that the Ottomans were no longer just a leader of the Islamic world, but a threat to Christianity. This fear in Europe became the main reason for anti-Ottoman coalitions, dreams of crusades and prayers in churches. But there was another side to the story. This defeat caused Europe to turn its eyes to the future. The Byzantine scholars who fled contributed greatly to intellectual developments in Europe, fueling the Renaissance movement. The knowledge of ancient Greek and Roman classics was revitalized in the hands of scholars in Italy and Western Europe. The repercussions of the conquest caused major transformations not only on the battlefield, but also in the world of thought. Constantinople was now Ottoman, and Mehmed the Conqueror decided to make it the heart of the empire immediately after his victory. In the past, Istanbul had been the meeting point between East and West, a center of trade, art, and politics. Fatih wanted to preserve and strengthen this legacy. He would do his best to transform this glorious city of the Old World into the brightest star of the Ottoman Empire. By making the city the capital, he took great steps to make it not only an administrative center, but also a cultural and economic center of attraction. Fatih's first goal was to ensure the peaceful cosmopolitan Greece. Determined to preserve Istanbul's cosmopolitan character, he tried to bring different nationalities under the Ottoman umbrella by recalling Greeks, Armenians, and Jews to the city. Dilapidated areas of the city were rapidly rebuilt, blending Ottoman architecture with Byzantine ruins to create a unique aesthetic. This process, which began with the conversion of Hagia Sophia into a mosque, was embellished with mosques, complexes, and markets. The narrow streets of Istanbul began to bear witness to the wealth of the Ottoman Empire, and the city soon became one of the most magnificent settlements in the East. Great strides were also made in economic terms. Fatih built new bazaars and inns to increase the commercial potential of Istanbul. Major harbors were repaired, and trade routes were brought under Ottoman control. With the fortifications and protection measures built around the city, Istanbul became both the gateway of the Ottoman Empire to the outside world and a safe home for the Ottomans at home. With every step Fatih took, the city grew bigger and bigger, and the Ottoman spirit that spread throughout the empire left its mark on this ancient city. But my friends, after this great victory, what will we do with the legacy that passed from Byzantium to the Ottomans? Will that legacy be the carrier of this new era, or will it be lost in the shadow of the old splendor? And how will the cultural revolution that Mehmed the Conqueror will initiate in the new capital change the empire? These are questions that need to be answered in the next narrative. I'm Benino Kinpia. My dear friends, the echoes of this conquest were not limited to the walls, but redrew the map of an entire world. That morning, not only the gates of Constantinople were open to the Ottomans, but also the history of humanity stepped into a brand new era. May 29, 1453, was not only the declaration of a victory, but also the closing of an era. With the conquest of Istanbul, the long and gloomy night of the Middle Ages came to an end and a new day dawned. It was the New Age, the beginning of a period of discoveries, scientific awakenings, and civilization's march towards unlimited horizons. With this victory, the nails driven into the dark castles of the Middle Ages were being removed one by one, and the world was being reshaped from east to west with the bridges built by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was no longer just a regional power, but a decisive actor in a global empire, and Constantinople was now the center of world trade, politics, and culture. This city, once the pinnacle of Rome, was now flying the flag of the Ottoman Empire in the sky. But you are mistaken, my friends, if you think that this new era born of conquest was only about the battlefields. The new age witnessed an awakening in human thought. The dark veils of ignorance that plagued Europe began to be illuminated by the light brought by the scholars fleeing from Constantinople. The knowledge of Byzantium sprouted again in the embrace of the Renaissance. This torch of civilization, born in Istanbul, awakened a new consciousness in the world. The old world was taking on a new and completely different face. The Ottoman Empire's rapid progress in this period was an indication of its determination to dominate the world. It was no longer only war and conquest, but also science, art, architecture, and cultural progress that constituted the fabric of this empire. The orders emanating from Topkapi Palace included not only new campaigns, but also visions of the progress of civilization. And this, my friends, should not be forgotten. The new age was shaped in the hands of a ruler like Mehmed the Conqueror. And this, my friends, is where we come to the end of our narrative. What were those old wise sayings? As one age ends, another age begins. But what will this new age bring? How will the Ottoman Empire leave its mark on world history? How will the balance between Europe and the Ottoman advance take shape? These are some of the new questions we will face on the stage of history. Perhaps we will meet again in our next story to find out these answers.